At a serene sanctuary nestled among tall, whispering trees, a mother bobcat gently welcomed her litter into the world. 3 kittens were strong and vigorous, but the 4th was impossibly small, tiny, fragile, and vulnerable. Barely larger than a human thumb, this little bobcat's survival seemed uncertain from the very start. Her temperature plummeted, her breathing grew shallow, and with each passing hour, death crept closer. Then, in a moment that defied protocol and logic, Dr. Vance decided to intervene. Personally. But could a creature so small, teetering on the edge of survival, truly make it? Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina awoke to a symphony of mist and bird song. In the heart of this verdant wilderness, the Blue Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary was a haven, a place where the wounded and the orphaned found a second chance. Within a secluded, custom-built den insulated with straw and the scent of pine, a bobcat the staff had named Shadow had just given birth. She was a magnificent creature, sleek and powerful, a recent arrival herself, after being found injured on a nearby highway. Now she was a mother, her world condensed to the 4 squirming, mooing lives nestled against her warm belly. Jenna, a young veterinary technician, whose passion for wildlife burned brighter than the morning sun, approached the den with the quiet reverence of someone entering a sacred space. It was her job to perform the first wellness check on the new litter. Through a small protected opening, she used a specialized scope to observe the new family, her heart swelling with a familiar mix of joy and awe. 3 of the kittens were robust, little replicas of their mother, already jostling for position with surprising vigor. But then, her breath caught in her throat. Tucked away, almost lost in the folds of Shadow's fur, was a 4th. It was a wisp, a fragment, a creature so impossibly small it seemed like an afterthought of creation. While its siblings were the size of plump baked potatoes, this one was scarcely larger than a man's thumb, a tiny knot of fur and bone that didn't seem to possess the energy to even nuzzle closer to its mother. Doctor. Jenna's voice was a tense whisper over the sanctuary's radio system. You need to see this. Dr. Elias Vance was a man carved from the same ancient timber as the mountains themselves. In his late 50s, his face was a roadmap of a life spent in the service of animals, etched with lines of compassion and a certain weariness that came from witnessing nature's impartial cruelty. Too many times, he thought he had seen it all. When he arrived at the den and peered through the scope, his professional optimism, already a finite resource, dwindled to a flicker, a micro runt. He murmured, his voice low and growly, extremely rare and extremely fragile. His initial assessment, delivered with a gentle but firm finality, was a death sentence. He explained to Jenna the grim realities of failure to thrive in the wild and even in the protective confines of the sanctuary. A mother bobcat's instincts were a brutal form of calculus. Shadow would instinctively pour her resources, her milk, her warmth, her grooming into the kittens with the greatest chance of survival. The runt, the statistical anomaly, would be ignored. It was not cruelty. It was the cold, hard logic of life. And so it was. Over the next few hours, they watched the heartbreaking drama unfold as the 3 healthy kittens nursed greedily. Shadow gently but persistently nudged the tiny one away. The small creature, too weak to protest, would roll onto its back, its sealed eyes and silent mouth a portrait of utter helplessness. Its condition deteriorated with terrifying speed. Jenna monitoring its vitals with a non-invasive laser. Thermometer saw its temperature begin to plummet. Hypothermia was setting in. Its already faint breathing grew shallower. Each tiny inhalation a monumental effort. Hypoglycemia, the inevitable consequence of starvation, was draining its last reserves of energy. The sanctuary director, a pragmatic man named Robert, discussed the options with Dr. Vance. Was intervention merely prolonging the inevitable? Would it be a kinder act to let nature, in its unsentimental wisdom, take its course? Dr. Vance felt the weight of that logic. He had presided over this sad ritual more times than he could count. Yet as he watched the kitten on the monitor, barely their flutter of life, something inside him rebelled. He saw a flicker of movement, a twitch of a paw so minuscule it was almost imperceptible. It was a protest, however feeble, against the encroaching darkness. And in that moment Dr. Vance, the seasoned, pragmatic veterinarian, made a decision that would ripple through the entire sanctuary. "Bring her to me," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I'm taking her home." The news spread through the small, tight-knit staff like a wildfire. Dr. Vance, a man who maintained a careful professional distance, who preached against the dangers of anthropomorphism, was personally intervening. It was an extraordinary breach of his own protocol, a radical act of hope against overwhelming odds. This, more than any miracle drug, was what shocked everyone. In the sterile quiet of the clinic, the kitten lay on a blue surgical towel, looking less like an animal and more like a discarded piece of fluff. She was so small she barely registered on the digital scale. Dr. Vance's large, capable hands, accustomed to setting the bones of deer and suturing the wounds of bears, moved with an almost supernatural delicacy. He fashioned a makeshift incubator from a simple cardboard box, lining it with a heating pad set to the lowest possible temperature and covering it with a soft fleece blanket. The environment had to be a perfect mimicry of a mother's warmth. Next came the most critical challenge: nourishment. The kitten was too weak to suckle. Dr. Vance knew that a feeding tube was the only option, a procedure fraught with peril. A single misplaced millimeter could send formula into her lungs, which would be fatal. He calculated the dosage of a high-calorie kitten milk replacer, adding a precise amount of electrolytes and a single life-giving drop of Caro syrup to fight the hypoglycemia. With the kitten wrapped in a warm cloth, he gently threaded a thin, flexible tube into her mouth, down her esophagus and into her stomach. Holding his breath, he slowly depressed the plunger of the syringe, delivering a minuscule amount of the precious fluid. He then withdrew the tube with the same painstaking care. He would have to repeat this delicate dance every 60 minutes around the clock. That evening, Dr. Vance drove home not to a quiet house, but to a vigil. He placed the incubator on his bedside table, the soft glow of the heating pad a beacon in the darkened room. The night was a blur of alarms set for 1 hour intervals. Each time he awoke, his first feeling was a lurch of dread. But each time he would find the tiny creature still breathing, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm so shallow it was almost invisible. He would perform the feeding, clean her with a warm, damp cotton ball to simulate her mother's grooming, and whisper words of encouragement into the quiet of the night. "Come on, little one," he'd murmur, his gruff voice softened to a whisper. "You're a fighter. I know you are." He decided to call her Pip, short for Pipsqueak. It was a name that fit her. Fragile existence. A small sound in a vast, silent world. The first 72 hours were a tightrope. Walk over an abyss. There were moments Elias Vance was certain he had lost her. Once in the pre-dawn gloom, he reached into the box to find her cold and limp. Panic, cold and sharp seized him. He quickly administered another drop of syrup directly to her gums and held her against his own chest, willing his body heat to transfer to her to spark the dying embers of her life. For long, agonizing minutes, nothing happened. Then a shudder. A weak, reedy mew escaped her lips. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. That was the turning point. From that moment on, Pip's recovery, while painstakingly slow, was steady. The first true victory was when her body temperature finally stabilized without the constant aid of the heating pad. Then came the day she began to weakly suckle on the tip of the syringe. Her own instincts kicking in. Dr. Vance felt a surge of triumph as he transitioned her from the feeding tube to a tiny, specially designed nursing bottle. Jenna became his constant co-conspirator. She would arrive at his house after her shift, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and concern, bringing supplies and offering to take over a few of the nighttime feedings so he could get some rest. She watched me as the bond between the gruff veterinarian and the impossibly small cat deepened. "I've never seen you like this, Dr. V," she said one afternoon as they watched Pip, now strong enough to crawl, knead her tiny paws on his finger. "I've never seen a cat like this," he replied, a rare, soft smile touching his lips. The day Pip's eyes opened was a milestone, celebrated with the reverence of a holy event. They were a milky, unfocused blue-gray, but as she blinked them open they seemed to lock onto Dr. Vance's face. In that gaze, he no longer saw just a patient or a project. He saw a person, spirit, a will to live that mirrored his own stubborn refusal to give up. As weeks turned into a month, Pip transformed. The scrawny wisp of fur began to fill out. Her coat, once dull and sparse, grew thick and plush, the faint spots of a bobcat becoming more pronounced. Her wobbly crawls became confident toddles, then playful pounces. She would launch ferocious attacks on his shoelaces and stalk crumpled pieces of paper with the deadly seriousness of a seasoned hunter. Her tiny needle-like claws would prick his skin and he would welcome the sensation as a sign of her growing strength. The sterile incubator in his bedroom was replaced by a large play pen in his living room filled with toys and small logs to climb on. The quiet solitude of his life was now filled with her chirps, purr, and the thud of her tiny body practicing ambushes. He had saved her life, but she in turn had brought a vibrant, chaotic joy back into his. But with her growing strength came a looming, bittersweet reality. Pip was not a house cat. She was a wild predator. And the goal had always been, must always be, to return her to her world. The next phase of her journey would be even more challenging than the first. He had taught her how to live. Now he had to teach her how to survive. The sanctuary staff, now fully invested in Pip's miraculous story, constructed a special enclosure. It was a masterpiece of rehabilitation design, a sprawling half-acre space, fenced with material that was impossible to climb. Inside it was a slice of the wild, dense thicket of rhododendron, towering pines, a rocky outcrop, and a small trickling stream. The key feature was a one-way observation blind. Pip could be monitored, but she would feel completely alone, a crucial step in weaning her off human dependency. The transition was hard on them both. The first day, Dr. Vance placed her in the enclosure and walked away. Her confused and distressed chirps followed. Him, each one a small dagger in his heart. He had been her entire world, her source of food, warmth, and comfort. Now he had to become a ghost. The rehabilitation was a masterclass in animal psychology. Food was no longer delivered in a bowl. Dr. Vance began by creating scent trails of rabbit and squirrel, leading her to hidden caches of meat. He was reawakening the dormant instincts encoded in her DNA. The introduction of live prey was the most difficult step both practically and emotionally. It began with crickets, which Pip at first regarded with more curiosity than predatory interest. She batted at them, playfully, a game she might have played with a ball of yarn. Dr. Vance and Jenna watched from the blind, their patience tested. "She has to get it, Elias," Jenna whispered, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the viewing slit. "If she can't hunt, she can't go back." Days later they introduced a live mouse. Pip's first attempts were clumsy, comical failures. She would pounce too late or with too much noise, sending the mouse scurrying to safety. Frustration mounted. Dr. Vance felt a familiar pang of doubt. Had he saved her from death, only to raise a bobcat that didn't know how to be a bobcat? Had his compassion ultimately crippled her? He left her alone for a full day. Painful but necessary step to stoke her hunger and sharpen her focus. The next morning they watched from the blind as another mouse was released into the enclosure. This time something was different. Pip didn't pounce immediately. She froze, her body low to the ground, her ears swiving to track the faintest rustle in the leaves. Her tail twitched, a metronome of pent-up energy. She was a coiled spring, a study in silent concentration. Then she moved. It wasn't a pounce. It was an explosion. A silent, fluid blur of motion that covered the distance in a heartbeat. The hunt was over in an instant. In the blind, Jenna let out a choked sob of relief. Dr. Vance felt a complex and powerful cocktail of emotions. There was immense pride, a deep, resonant joy at her success. But beneath it was a profound sadness. This was the first true kill, the first real step away from him and toward her destiny. He was watching his tiny, fragile patient become the lethal predator she was born to be. Over the next few months, the lessons escalated. She learned to hunt quail, then young rabbits. She learned the patient art of the ambush, the importance of silence and surprise. She grew into a magnificent young bobcat, her coat a perfect camouflage of tawny browns and dark spots, her eyes a piercing, intelligent yellow. The playful kitten was gone, replaced by a confident, solitary hunter. She was ready. The final checkup was a formality. Pip was the picture of health, strong, lean, with the reflexes of a master athlete. The decision to release her was unanimous, but it weighed on Elias Vance like a physical stone. He had cheated nature to give her a life, and now he had to give her back to the very wilderness that would have claimed her. At birth, the night before her release, he sat in the observation blind for hours watching her. She moved through the enclosure with a silent grace that took his breath away. She was no longer his Pip, the pipsqueak, who fit in his palm. She was a wild spirit, and the enclosure, once so vast, now seemed like a cage. He remembered the feeling of her weak, fluttering heartbeat against his finger, the milky blue of her newborn eyes, the sound of her first purr. Lifetime of memories packed into less than a year. They chose a release site, deep within the Pisgah National Forest, a remote, rugged area teeming with prey, and far from the dangers of roads and human settlements. The morning of the release was crisp and clear. The drive was silent, both Dr. Vance and Jenna lost in their own thoughts. At the site, he carried the transport crate to a clearing, overlooking a dense wooded valley. He knelt down, his hand resting on the metal grate for a moment. "You be safe out there," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Be smart. Be fierce. Be free." He took a deep breath and unlatched the door. Pip didn't bolt out. She emerged slowly, cautiously, her nose twitching as she sampled the thousand new scents of the forest. She took a few steps, then stopped and looked back. Her yellow eyes met his. It was a long, silent gaze, a moment of acknowledgement, of gratitude, of farewell. Then, with a flick of her tufted ears, she turned. She did not run. She simply melted into the undergrowth, disappearing into the tapestry of green and brown as if she were a ghost. One moment she was there, a solid living presence, and the next, she was gone. Dr. Vance and Jenna stood in the clearing for a long time, the silence of the forest amplifying the emptiness left by her departure. A year drifted by. Life at the sanctuary continued its cyclical rhythm of rescue, rehabilitation, and release. The story of Pip became a beloved legend, a tale told to new volunteers as a testament to the sanctuary's mission, a symbol of hope against all odds. Dr. Vance never spoke of her much, but those who knew him saw a change. The weariness in his eyes was still there, but it was now tempered by a new light, a renewed belief in the power of a single, compassionate choice. One crisp autumn afternoon, he and Jenna hiked into the forest to check the memory cards on a series of remote camera traps they used to monitor wildlife populations. They'd never had a definitive sign of Pip, though Dr. Vance often found himself scanning the trees on his hikes, hoping for a fleeting glimpse. Back in the lab, they downloaded the images. The first few cameras showed the usual suspects: a browse white-tailed deer, a portly raccoon, a black bear lumbering past. Then Jenna clicked open the files from the camera nearest Pip's release site. "Elias, come look at this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He walked over to her computer. The first image showed a stunningly beautiful adult female bobcat stepping confidently into the frame. She was healthy, her coat gleaming, her muscles taut. It had to be her. Dr. Vance's heart hammered against his ribs. She had survived. He leaned closer as Jenna clicked to the next image. The bobcat had stopped, turning to look directly at the camera, as if she knew it was there. And then, the final shot, the one that shattered the professional composure of the old veterinarian and made him sink into a nearby chair, tumbling out of the brush. Behind the magnificent bobcat were two tiny spotted kittens, their paws clumsy, their faces full of wide-eyed wonder at the world. Pip wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. She had a family. The tiny, fragile life he had refused to let go of, the flicker of a heartbeat he had nurtured in the palm of his hand, had come full circle. The cycle of life which he had so audaciously interrupted was now continuing wild and free, exactly as it should be. Tears welled in Elias Vance's eyes, blurring the image on the screen. But they were not tears of loss. They were tears of a profound, overwhelming joy. The smallest bobcat ever seen had left the biggest mark on his heart. Permanent reminder that sometimes the most shocking thing a person can do is to simply refuse to give up hope.